I come from a military family. When my dad retired, we moved to Texas, where I went to high school near Austin. And that's where I met Noelle. About a year after she graduated high school, started dating and then got married. And that's when I enlisted in the Navy in 2005, submarine electrician. Then about a year and a half, I got picked up for a commissioning program to become an officer. From there, I went through the University of Texas to get my bachelor's degree. From there, went back through the nuclear power pipeline as an officer, and then went to the USS Alabama Gold Crew. I was there for almost 4 years, spent some time on shore duty, about 2.5 or about 3 years, doing various jobs, and then went back and I was the weapons officer, department head on the USS Jimmy Carter for about 3 years, and then now I'm back on shore duty now.
So you grew up in a Navy family. Was it just in your bones?
Kind of. So my dad was on ballistic missile submarines just like I was for a bit, but he retired pretty early on when I was in sixth grade. For a period of time up through middle school and high school, I had no real plans to join the military. And it wasn't until after high school and me and Noelle got together that thinking about joining, talking to my dad, and her dad was a warrant officer in the Army. They were both, military background. Talking to them, that's what kind of led me towards the Navy and then towards the submarine force and nuclear community. Picked up for the commissioning program, and we were at the University of Texas when Logan was diagnosed, which was in 2010. Austin doesn't really have a big base. We were just attached to the college there. There wasn't a whole lot of resources available when he was first diagnosed. We moved from there to South Carolina for about a year, almost 2 years, that we started to figure out like what resources were available, at least as far as TRICARE is concerned. When Logan was first diagnosed, Noelle reached out to the Sanfilippo community, and that's where we really started to find out what it actually entailed and different resources that other parents that had already gone through it and had already been diagnosed had been using. Logan was diagnosed in January of 2010, and then Noelle reached out and started talking to people and found out about the cord blood transplant, which at the time was still experimental. There hadn't been a whole lot of Sanfilippo kids that had gone through it, and she had talked to one parent that had her son had gone through it. She was an Army parent. She had already navigated a lot of the TRICARE hurdles for getting the cord blood transplant. So when we went about looking into that, she'd already kind of paved the way for that to at least get us through TRICARE. TRICARE is the insurance company for all of the military. All branches use TRICARE, and then it's just broken up into different regions depending on where you're stationed. TRICARE is really good for certain things, but as a lot of military families know, there's a lot of stuff that you have to just kind of know, that like loopholes and just things you have to work through to make sure that you get the care and the resources you need. And so big things like a cord blood transplant, which is expensive and at the time was not approved by TRICARE at the time, having that someone had already gone before to make that pathway easier was definitely helpful. In June 2010 that we ended up going to Duke there in North Carolina to get the transplant. It was pretty cool because TRICARE funded it. They approved for the procedure, but also funded for our travel and for us to stay there while he was going through it, like 5 months that they paid for all of that and essentially an apartment for me and Noelle to stay there. We were going through all that. That was really beneficial. So he went, he got the transplant in, June through November. And then we came back to Austin, about another year, and not long enough for me to graduate from there and then commission. And then we went off to South Carolina for the next station for my pipeline for submarine force.
Tell me about the experience leading up to actually going off to sea for the first time.
In 2013, we moved to Washington, where I got assigned to the Alabama Gold Crew. It was like January of 2014 is when I first went to sea. I'd been on I'd had to go to different schools for a month or two across the country for one thing or another, but it was always, we had like FaceTime and, cell phones and all that. So where we could communicate. It was about a 3-month underway, that first one. And it wasn't too unusual. It was a little weird being away from the family for that long. We'd been married for almost 10 years, I think, at that point. Yeah, it was about 8 years at that point. It was the first time we'd really been apart for an extended period of time with really no communication. Because on submarines, you have emails every once in a while, like every couple of weeks. But other than that, there's no communication whatsoever. So it was a little weird. And the biggest thing that I noticed was that when I got back, every time you notice, there's things slightly different. Like the kids are slightly older. There's just small things you notice. But with Logan, the first time, it was a little off-putting somewhat in that he seemed to not recognize me. There was a kind of a hesitance from him to give him a hug or anything like that. And it took him a little bit, I'd say a couple days really to realize, oh no, this is dad. He's back. It was 6, 7, somewhere around there. It was a little weird, just that not the usual, where, you come up and he's like super happy and jumping around. but it was a little like how he is when other people come and visit, like in-laws or my parents or whatever come and visit. First, they don't come that often. He's a little standoffish a little bit, and then it's warmed up to him. And that's what it seemed a little bit like that first time. But that was really the only time that happened. From every other underway after that, it was very, he recognized me, but that first one was a little different. I don't remember exactly what age he fully lost his speech, but he had, he had some words and he could combine some words, but never real full sentences. He recognized things, flashcards, he could name those, and he could communicate some of his needs through his words. But by that point, pretty sure it was kind of dwindling down to a few words that he could say, and he'd say no. That was one that he could say a lot and maintain for a long time. It's not a large vocabulary at that point, I don't think. When you're assigned to the boat, my first boat, the Alabama, it was usually like 3 to 4 months at a time where you'd be out and then you'd be in for 3 months or so. So it was pretty regular schedule. And then when you're on shore duty, like I was for about 3 years in between the Alabama and the Jimmy Carter, you're home all the time. You go to work, it's like a 9 to 5 job most of the time. There was a period of time where I did a lot of travel in one of those when I was an aide for an admiral. I traveled with the admiral a lot, a few days at a time, 2 to 3 times a month or so, but nothing crazy. And then when I was on the Jimmy Carter, it was a lot more underway time, and periods of time that we were underway could be anywhere from like a week to, we had one that was almost 6 months long of like zero communication whatsoever. That one was a little tougher because it was a week or two at a time sometimes, and then coming back for a week, or a couple of months at a time out to sea and then coming back for a couple of weeks. It was a lot more at sea time away from the family on that boat than the previous boat. It could be upwards of, the longest that we had was almost 6 months straight with no communication and just straight gone.
It's hard to wrap my head around that, especially when you have a kid who has a cognitive regression disease. Had you seen him on like Zoom calls?
The almost 6 month period, we were straight dark, no communication, at least no communication off the boat. You could get like what they call family grams, where family can send like really short burst email. That's all they can send. They don't know that we got it. There's no response from us. But other than that, there's no communication whatsoever until we get back. That one was about 2 years ago. So he was 14 at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of change for that one. He had grown quite a bit. You can see like some maturity changes, I guess, just looking older. As far as physical regression, he hasn't regressed as much over the last few years. Like he lost his speech a while back. I think at like age 10 was like when it was fully gone. We can tell what he wants and needs most of the time. So there wasn't a whole lot of change, but it was still the issue that realized over time, not so much on my first boat, but definitely my second boat on the Carter when I was gone for longer periods of time and shorter periods in port, was that Sanfilippo is a regressive genetic disorder, but it's also terminal. So every time you go underway, whether it's a submarine or deployed overseas or whatever, there's always a risk of something happening to your family, because that's just a risk that you take when you're away. With my situation in particular, we had to fill out these forms talking about our family and any issues that your family may have that might come up that might present a need to get you back home quickly. Whether it's like, hey, my mom is really old and, there's issues that sometime in the next 6 months, I may need to be by her bedside, those kind of things. Every time I filled out those forms, Logan came up for that very reason. And as time has gone on and as this last 3 years on the Carter, that form and those questions meant a little, I guess it took more meaning, because every time I went underway, I felt that risk was higher and higher, that I would come home and he wouldn't be there. That was always weighed heavily on my mind when we were out to sea these last 3 years.
During that time, is there any kind of support crew or group that people in similar shoes as you on your boat? It just sounds like it's got to be so isolating and lonely. And I'd also like you to touch on the way your relationship with Noelle functions. You have a wife who's an advocacy champion while you're maybe out at sea, kind of like a whole different world. And then you come back. How do you fit back into the world that she kind of has under control while you're gone? I'd love to hear some of the dynamics there.
Absolutely. So underway, because submarine crews are so small, typically the ones I was on was like 150 to 200 people. You don't typically have a whole lot of other crew members that are in somewhat similar situations, especially with the last boat I was on. There was very, very few. And honestly, a lot of times when you're underway, you get so busy and you keep yourself busy, so that you don't really have time to sit down and think about home. When you start doing that, when you really sit down and start thinking about home, it just gets harder, and you don't start thinking about it until you're on your way back. The last couple of weeks, you're like, now you can kind of transition to looking forward to being home. But while you're out, it sometimes you don't know how long you're going to be out. The schedule's so busy, you don't get a lot of sleep. It's a lot of keeping your mind busy, keeping your body busy the whole time, so that you're not focusing on what you're missing, the loss. Really, that it's somewhat of a grief pattern, as it were. You're missing your family the whole time, and if you dwell on that too much, that you can't do your job. When I come home, the dynamic that we established early on was, no matter what was happening, when I came home from work, whether I was on shore duty or whether I was attached to the boat but not at sea, I would just jump into whatever was going on and help out, and try to do that as much as possible without being asked, because I know how much work it takes to not only be there for Logan, really 24/7, taking care of his needs, but also for we have Aiden and Austin as well, to ensure that they are having their needs met, and continuing to uh, flourish in their own way. That is difficult in itself. And if that was the only thing that was going on, then that's already hard enough. But also doing all of the other stuff that Noel does, it amazes me every time, especially when these last 3 years, I would come home from being underway, and everything's still running smoothly. Everything is awesome at home as far as running the household, but also all the other stuff that she was doing with her TikTok channel that she started, and then into Instagram, and all of the nonprofit stuff that she was doing in the background that she basically helped start and was running for housing advocacy. All of that stuff in the background, like, it was always amazing to see all that. Even though, yes, I was out to sea or whatever, or at work during the day, I always felt that we were a team when I would come home, no matter what. And there's a lot of unspoken just jumping in and helping, and just really giving each other a break when we could. And it was important to us to maintain that the whole time, whether I was attached to a boat and at sea a lot, or whether I was on shore duty and home more, to maintain the being able to fully take care of Logan, whether it was Noel taking care of him or me. So that it was a couple years ago, Noelle went on a cruise with a few of her friends, and I was able to be here and be home with Logan and the other, and Aiden and Austin, to allow that to happen. So I was able to, even though I'd been gone here and there and not here all the time, I was still able to provide that respite for Noelle when we could.
I bet when you're around, I mean, she has every right to be like, "Hey, I'm going away
Oh
for a
yeah, yeah.
month with my friends." You got nothing you could say to that.
No.
Hey, if I can make it work, I will. Are you surprised, or how's it all felt for you knowing that your wife has become like this TikTok sensation that's reached millions of people? Is it something you would have ever expected of her?
I would say it wasn't something that I wouldn't have expected of her. I've always been very proud of everything that she has done. And over the first, several years of us being married and having kids and being in the military, it was a lot of ensuring that the kids were developing, and taking care of Logan and making sure they're doing good in school. But the TikTok channel, when I went to sea the first time on the Carter, I came back. She had started it while I was gone for a few months, and it blew up. And when I went back and I started watching all of the videos that she had done, I noticed that it was just a lot of her just being honest and talking about the reality of being a parent with a child with Sanfilippo syndrome, but also just the family dynamics of having a disabled child, right? It was honest, and it was funny. A lot of it was funny. And I thought that was just her being genuine in who she is, because she is very, very funny, and she's very honest about a lot of things, about everything, really. I always felt when I would go to sea after that, I had her download all of the videos that she had made and put them on a hard drive, so I could, whenever I wanted to, I could sit there and just scroll through them, because obviously we don't have any internet access when we're underway. But I had 1,000 videos or more on this hard drive of all the TikTok videos that she'd been making. I always thought that was pretty unique, because everybody else has like pictures of their family, and they might have some pictures on their computer. But I was able to have just hours and hours of family, Noelle, Aiden, Austin, and Logan, and the dogs, all of that. I could just sit and watch, and you could watch it over time and watch the progression of the family over the last year or so. Obviously, right up until I left each time, but it was unique in the sense that I could watch my family while I was underway.
Now, the families, when they're, 'cause I don't know too much about Navy life, military life
Mhm.
or anything. They're provided with, are they all kind of on campus together with other Navy families, or can they be in random neighborhoods?
You can live on base. It's not required to live on base. We do live on base, and we've lived on base here for the last 10 years or so because we haven't had to move. But a lot of families live out in town. You're still in the local area, but especially with like the submarine families, the families of the submarine sailors, they have support systems in place. A lot of the spouses are part of like spouse groups. When right before the boat's going to go underway, they have these informational meetings saying, hey, look at all these, showing them all the resources that families have while their sailors underway. And a lot of especially the officer spouses will get together. They'll have little get-togethers, and they support each other. So if something comes up with someone's family or there's issues, they help each other out. If there's someone needs surgery or some issues happen, they have some kind of support in place, or they can reach out for support if needed.
Yeah. Now, how do you deal with stress, anxiety, whatever, when you're not working and keeping your mind off of the craziness of life? You exercise, you listen to music. What are some of your hobbies?
I used to be a big runner. I used to run a lot. Recently, I've kind of shifted off from running to lifting, but it's really just exercise. I'll exercise for a couple hours a day. I do it underway as well. There's not a lot of room for exercise equipment, but where there is room, they fit whatever they can in there. Before I would go on watch, I would spend a couple hours working out and then go on watch, and that's really most how I deal with any kind of stress, and then listening to music during that. But yeah, lots of working out.
How do you feel overall that the US military, different branches have, or at least in your case, the Navy, are in terms of being accommodative for families with special needs? And where do you kind of feel maybe some of the areas that are lacking or even better than you might have expected would be the case?
So I would say that it kind of depends on, it's kind of weird to say, but it kind of depends on your experience. So the Navy in particular, in our situation, does, I'd say, pretty well because they have a couple different programs for families with special needs. And the Exceptional Family Member Program, EFM, is what you're basically required to enroll in if you have anybody with some kind of special need, whether that's ranges all the way from someone who has asthma to, in Logan's case, a much higher category of EFM. And so that helps at least the Navy know that your family has needs and might need specialists, or that you might like moving is always a huge deal, especially with
Yeah.
families that have those special needs, because the specialists, if we were forced to move, we would lose a lot of the specialists that Logan has here, a lot of the other, his occupational therapy, physical therapy, all of that we would lose. And then wherever we moved, we would have to go on a waiting list, 6 to 12
Yeah.
months. So he would be without all of that stuff for,
Wow.
that
Yeah.
long.
Are all of those specialists provided by the Navy, or would she have to go out and seek like people from around town who are specialists in this stuff and they have a wait list?
It's kind of a combination. You have to be approved through TRICARE. When you go to move, the gaining area that you would be going to, they will not even look at anything to do with you until you have orders to go there. And you usually don't get orders to go to a place until you're like sometimes within like 2 months of moving. These are the official orders telling you to move. And if you don't have those, they won't even start like the process of getting you on a waiting list. It almost guarantees you're going to have some kind of gap in coverage or gap in services when you move.